おはようございます。今日の朝のHoudini作業配信を始めていきたいと思います。今日は配信1日目でうまくできなかった公式にあるワイングラスを破壊してカルマレンダラーでレンダリングするという一通りのチュートリアルを、のんびりやっていきたいなと思ってます。なんか対象が確か初めてやった時バージョン19向けのチュートリアルだったので19で始めてみたところ、動画の方では確か 18.5 をおそらく使っていて、なんか微妙にノードのバージョンとかが違ってなんかうわってなってうまくグダグダになったんで途中で配信やめたと思うので、これはずっと配信やりたいなと思っていたので、休みなのでのんびりやっていこうかなと思います。なんで今日はちょっと長めかなと思います。はい、では動画を流します。
The Houdini Foundation Smashing Wine Glass tutorial, where you'll take a project from beginning to end and learn a little bit about Houdini along the way. This lesson will start with you drawing a profile curve that will be used to define the shape of the wine glass. You'll be taking that profile curve and revolving it, then subdividing to make it a little smoother. Once you've got the outer wine glass, you'll use that same geometry to define the inner fluid, which will be used in the simulation later. Next, you'll model the bullet. This will start with a primitive sphere that you then clip and extend. Once you've got the basic shape, you'll then clean up the ends to create better topology. Subdivide that, and now you have your bullet shape. It will then be moved up and over so it's targeted right at the wine glass. And then you'll be able to look from the side and begin to use these freehand lines to draw out where you want the fracturing to be on that surface. Those lines will then be extruded. You'll be able to move them into place. You can then take some of them and duplicate them, rotate them around, just to create a little more interest in the kinds of cracks that you're going to get out of the model. Once you have those, you'll take all of those surfaces and you'll agitate those using a mountain sop. So that'll give you a little bit of noise in there. Once you have that, you'll add a boolean. You'll use the shatter option.
ゲームしてたんです。
load that to see what it's going to look like.
こんな時間まで。
Now back into the simulation world, you take those pieces and you run them through an RBD sim.
これから寝るんですか?
You can then make certain objects active and certain objects passive. You can then add in the bullet to create the smash that you're looking for. Next, you'll go in and add the fluids. So this will take the shape that was modeled earlier, fill it with a fluid, which initially looks like these little dots. Run the simulation to get the interaction between the fluid and the shattered glass. And then once you have that, you can go in and surface that and get a sense of what the surface would be as a result of that. The next step is to cache and retime the simulation. This involves saving parts of it to disk. At this point, only doing 10 frames. And then having those 10 frames brought back in and then retimed using a special node that will allow us to extend it from 10 frames to 50 frames to give sort of a bullet time effect where it goes out and then sucks back in time. This same approach will be used for all three objects, the retiming. At the end, you'll take each one of them and export them as USD files. Those USD files will be used in the Solaris workspace, or LOPS, and that will allow you to bring them into USD. and set up your cameras, and all of these elements will work together as you prepare and light the shot. You can use your camera to get exactly the shot that you're looking for, and there you go. You've got your simulation in that Solaris environment. Add in a environment light to get the look that you want, and then you can use the Karma render in the viewport to test out the look of the shot. And you can see as we move different frames that that's working. Once that's in place, the idea is to add in some materials, and there'll be glass, copper, and a wine material, and these will get assigned onto the surface, and that will give us the final look of the shot. To render out a sequence, you'll learn how to add in a Karma node, set that to render from the full 1 to 50, set up for disk, and render out. You'll also learn how to use the denoiser as part of that. Then you can load that back through mplay, and there we go. You've completed the project. So let's get started. In this lesson, we're going to define the
では、始めていきたいと思います。
basic shape of the wine glass.
あれ出してないな。ちょっと待ってよ。前回19で失敗したので、今回は Houdini のバージョン 18.5 にしてます。チュートリアル結構ね、ここのバージョンを見せてくれないことがあるので、ちょっとバージョンには気をつけるといいと思います。はい、ではやっていきます。
glass and the liquid that lies inside. To start, we're going to set a project to the directory that you downloaded from the website, the Fluids Lesson Directory. We're going to accept that as the project directory. And now when we go to save files, like let's save this starting file, they can go right in that directory, and you can keep a reference of everything as you work. Let's accept. Now, the first thing we want to do is change our viewport layout. We're going to go to a 4-view layout, and then we're going to go over the front view and go spacebar B to bring that up. Once we have that, we can set up the background, and this can be an image, which we currently have set up in the directory from the project, and we accept that. Now, if you look at the path, you'll notice that it's $home. It's literally going to my home directory. We actually would prefer this if it was local to this project. So if we use $hip instead, you'll see that we can go find the scene file, then go to the texture and accept it from here. And you'll notice that the path is smaller. $hip, the texture directory, that's a
下をつけなきゃいけないから。
a better way of keeping things packaged up. Now, the way we originally set that up, it's zooming with the change of the view. What we want is we want to place it with turn off autoplace, and that will allow us to set this up in such a way that when we zoom in and out, the background will move with it in a way that allows us to trace on the grid or on the side profile here. We're going to draw a curve. To do that, we're going to get the curve tool up here on the
きなかった苦い思い出が蘇るな。と
the shelf. Now, this tool will allow us to go draw points from point A to point B. We're going to use grid snap, get first two, and then we're going to go a little more freehand to get the other ones. Now this curve is a polyline, so it's points and primitives, and this will allow us to get a nice polygonal model when we revolve it later. Now we can place these points down as we go. If we don't quite like what we want, you can undo to go back and redo a point, or you can go back and fix them later. But we should be pretty good. It's fairly simple to trace this. Now,
に手が疲れる。
we can also zoom in with a space bar, and that will allow us to zoom in while we're in the process of drawing. And then we can use grid snap for the last 3 or 4 points, and that will allow us to get what we're looking for. Press enter to finish the curve. Now we want to go back to the 3D view, so we're going to go spacebar B and then spacebar B with our cursor over the 3D. View to get back into it. Now we've got that 3D curve. We're going to use the C key to bring up the radial menu. We're going to go and get the Revolve tool. And there we have our Revolve 3D. shape. Now to define this a little bit further, we're going to want to subdivide it, but before we do, we're going to double click, shift double click, and then press the shift key and double click 2 more edges.
2、3、2で頂点、3でエッジか。
We're going to double click, shift double click, and then press the shift key and double click 2 more edges here and here. Double click, double click. And we're going to take these particular edges and we're going to go tab and then crease. Start typing crease. Press enter and we're going to and then crease. Start typing crease. Press enter, and we're going to crease those edges. So that means when we subdivide, those edges will stay relatively sharp. Now, if we went up to 10, they'd be completely sharp. But we want a little bit of roundness to them, but not as much smoothing as we're going to do with the rest of the wine glass. I'm going to select all the geometry, and then just we can go tab, subdivide. The rest of the wine glass. I'm going to select
部選択するんだ。出ないからわかんないぞ。これオート切り替えだから、この状態で4か。で、ようやくわかった。これで、サムディバイドか。
Select all the geometry, and then just I'm going to select not as much smoothing as we're going to do with the rest of the wine glass. I'm going to select all the geometry.
プリミティブモード。あ、ここでプリミティブに切り替えてから、なるほど。
Geometry, and then just we can go tab subdivide, and then set that to a depth of 2, and there we go. That'll give us our wine glass. And you notice that top edge and the bottom edges, they're not perfectly sharp, but they're sharper than they would be normally with subdivide, because they would sort of project out. And to finish this off, what we want to do is we're going to put a null object down, a null node, and we're going to call this wine glass out, or just
クリスとサブディバイドがだいぶ詰まったからな。で、ここがちゃんと面が残ってる。OK だな。今回は大丈夫そうだ。できたから。
glass out rather. And that null object can be useful later when you want to insert other nodes in a network. It's just a good way of completing a network as you're working. So, and we'll call this the wine glass up at the object level. And there you go. We've created our first model. Now what we want to do is we want to take that model and use it to create the wine inside. So we're going to use this modify extract tool to create a second version this modify it create the wine inside. So we're going to use this modify extract
そうなんだ。このシェルフ一発で、ね、オブジェクトマージ作ってくれんの？マジか。ここ最初アウトにフラグ立ってるやつ引っ張ってくるのか ちゃ便利だな。
Tool to create a second version of the wine glass that's basically object merging in the old glass, the old geometry. And this allows us to go in and make some modifications. So we're going to go into this second one we have here. And we're going to start by doing primitive selection. And first we're going to take the select tool and we're going to go in and select maybe those polygons there. And then press the delete key, and that will get rid of them. And it will also insert a blast node in the network, which will hold that that delete process. Now, once we have that, we're going to go back with spacebar B and spacebar B to a 3D view. We're going to double click on this outer shell. So we're going to go back to the select tool, double click, and that selects everything except for the inner surface because those two are not connected. Select, double click, and that selects everything except for the inner surface because those two are not connected. And we press delete, and there we go. We've got the inner surface that we're going to use for the wine. Now this surface, because it was the inside of the glass, is now not facing the right way. Press N to select all the faces, and Tab reverse to flip them.
Viewport で作るスタイルマジやめてほしいな。
Press N to select all.
で、選択して。
The inside of the glass is now not facing the right way. Press N to select all the faces, and Tab reverse to flip.
裏面を起こしたから反転させるとね。
Once this is set up properly, you can now go in and add a Polyfill node to the top surface, and this will close everything off. Now, when you first set this up, you're going to want to set the fill mode to quadrilateral grid, and that gives you a nice cleaner look, and then set the tangent strength to 0 just so that it doesn't bulge at all, so it keeps it flat. Now, once we have this, we want to select everything with the N key again. And then we're going to go and add a Poly Extrude just to add a little bit of thickness, create some overlap between the glass and the fluid, which will help with rendering down the line. So we're going to go up to polygons, add a poly thing with the N. Now, once we have this, we want to select everything with the N key. Again, and then we're going to go and add a Poly Extrude just to add a little bit of thickness, create some overlap between the glass and the fluid, which will help with rendering down the line. So we're going to go up to polygons, up to polygon extrude, using the C key to get the radial menu, and then we can set a distance of 0.01. And once we have that, we will again add a null node down, and the null node will allow us to just create a nice clean out for this, and we'll call this fluid out, capitalizing it to make sure it shows up in lists in an easy distinguishable way. And we'll call this object the wine object, and that will cover the fluid. And there we go. So we now have a wine glass and the wine inside it ready to simulate. That will cover the fluid. And there we go. So we now have a wine glass and the wine inside it. Ready to simulate. So let's turn both of these off, the display off, and go work on the bullet. In part 2, we're going to model the bullet that will be used to smash the wine glass. Start by bringing up the radial menu using the C key and going down and getting a primitive sphere. Press Enter to place it at the origin. And spacebar H to close in and look at it a little bit more closely. We're going to dive down to the geometry level, and from here let's switch it to its x-axis and set up some parameters that will make it sort of a elongated tube. So 0.2, 0.125, and 0.125. And let's put the columns of 12. Spacebar H again to close in. And now we're going to clip this. We're going to press N to select everything, and go Tab Clip. Click this. We're going to press N to select everything. Go Tab Clip. And that's not oriented the right way, so let's just change its direction from 1, 0, 0. That looks a little better. And once we have that, we're going to press 3 to switch to edge mode, double click to get the edge there, and we're going to go Poly Extrude. And once we have that, we're going to switch to press 3 to switch to edge mode, double click to get the edge there, and we're going to go Poly Extrude and set Transform Extruded Front, and then go down and set the Transform Z parameter to 0.04, and then scale in all 3 directions, 0.7, and that will bring it down. Now we have an opening on the back side, but we're going to also open up the front just to get rid of the sort of the pointy part and create better topology. So we're going to press 4 to go back to primitive selection. We're going to zoom in here, and we're going to select this, press the A key, and then move over and press the middle key to select the whole loop. Once we have that, press delete, and now we have openings on both sides. If we go into the parameter pane, we can just tab and type Polyfill, and this will close both sides. And at first it's just quadrilaterals. We want to go to quadrilateral grid and set the corner offset to let's say 1, just rotate a little bit. Now once we have that, we can take the whole shape and subdivide it to get a smoother result. Why does nice closed shape work well as a collision object for our simulation? And subdivide, and we'll just add a little extra geometry there, type 2. Okay, so now we have the bullet that we're going to use. What we want to do is go to the object level and change the name to bullet. And then we're going to move it here at the object level. So first we're going to go spacebar B, and then we're going to go spacebar B to go back to the side. And we're going to move it across over. Turn off grid snapping. Maybe move it up.
なんだこれ何してんだ。
And we're going to move it across over.
そして、スイッチで打ったの早いな。
Turn off grid snapping. Maybe move it up. Line it up sort of the center of the wine, upper part of the wine glass. Maybe we'll just put some numbers in here. -20. And just even that up to 5. Probably could have used grid snap. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go back. We can turn back on the wine and the wine glass, and we're ready to do the RBD simulation. Actually, we don't need the wine for that, so let's turn that off, and see you in the next lesson. In part 3, we're going to fracture the wine glass and prepare it for the RBD simulation. To start, we're going to go back to a 3D view where we have the wine glass that we need to break into pieces. To do this, we're going to start by putting a grid into the scene that we're going to use as a tracing surface. Press enter to place it at the use a grid into the scene that we're going to use as a tracing surface. Press enter to place it at the origin, and we'll dive down and set this up. So this is basically going to it.
選択モードで操作するからやりにくいな。
For the RBD simulation. To start, we're going to go back to a 3D view where we have the wine glass that we need to break into pieces. To do this, we're going to start by putting a grid into the scene that we're going to use as a tracing surface. Press enter to place it at the origin, and we'll dive down and set this up. So this is basically going to encompass the object, and we're going to use this to draw some curves on. So just set that up, and we're good to go. Now spacebar B, and then we're going to go back to, in this case, the right view, and press W to go into wireframe, and we can see the bullet behind there. Now we're going to select W to go into wireframe, and we can see the bullet behind there. Now we're going to select all of the pieces here, double click, and And now we're going to start using the Draw Curve tool to draw curve. Double click. And now we're going to start using the Draw Curve tool to draw curves where we want fracture lines to be. So we can draw as many in here as we want. Their freehand geometry makes it easy to get a nice organic look. And we can also put some down here in the stem so that the stem also is affected by the smashing. Now, once we have all of that and we're happy with that, let's add one more in there. We press N, select all of those pieces. And then we're going to go back to the 3D view. And now we're going to go in and add a Poly Extrude. Going to specifically go in the X direction, and we're going to go -4.5. And we're going to add about 4 divisions in there just to give it some detail. Next, we're going to add in a transform node, and this will allow us to center the piece back onto the geometry. So we'll just use half of the value we had before, 2.25, and there it is centered in there. So we want to make this a little more interesting than just this. So we're going to go in and add some other pieces that go in a different direction. We're going to use the existing pieces. We're going to double click on, let's say, this sheet right here. So we want to make this a little more interesting than just this. So we're going to go in and add some other pieces that go in a different direction. We're going to use the existing pieces. We're going to double click on, let's say, this sheet right here. We're going to go tab, duplicate, and then we can just rotate that into place. So we're going to rotate. Rotate that and rotate that, and there we go. And that gives us just some cuts going in a different direction. We can double click another piece and get that, and now we're going to rotate. Now it looks like I accidentally copied. Two, I don't think actually, and now we're going to rotate. Now it looks like another piece and get that, and cuts going in a different direction. We can double click another piece and get that, and now we're going to rotate. Now it looks like I accidentally copy 2, I don't think actually has been moved properly, so there should only be 2 copies there, but for this we seem to have an extra one. Double click on, let's say, this piece down here, and we'll do that as well. And again, we'll duplicate and we'll rotate that and maybe just move that up a little bit so that the cut is at a different angle in a different spot. And we can do that with any of the pieces, but once we do that, we press N, and we're going to add in some agitation by putting a mountain top on that, and that will also create a little more interest in how the cuts look. Let's put a null object down just to sort of complete this step, and we're going to call this fracture out. So this has all been built in a separate object, and we need to get this back into with the wine glass. So we're going to go in here. Let's just name that properly, keep things organized. So we're going to go fracture geo, and we're going to hide that because we don't actually need that as a part of our scene. We're going to go into the wine glass, and from here we're going to
version Houdini is this? Houdini version is 80.5. Okay. Hello, thanks for watching.
As a part of our scene. We're going to go into the wine glass, and from here we're going to put down an object merge. We're going to go into the wine glass, and from here we're going to put down part of fracture geo, and we're going to hide that because we don't actually need that as a part of our scene. We're going to go into the wine glass, and for
18.5 にアップデートしたらいいよって勧めるのなんて言えばいいんだろう。
From here we're going to put down an object merge node. And this node will allow us to bring in the geometry from the fracture glass. So we easily find the fracture out. There we go, and now it's part of this network. But we need to connect them, and we're going to do that using a Boolean. So we're going to take the subdivided geometry and the fractured geometry and Boolean them together. Now, to get this to work, we need set B, which is just surfaces, to be treated as surfaces. And we need the operation to be shatter. And that will give us what we want. To see this, there's a node called Exploded View that we can put down, and that will allow us to see what our fractures are actually looking like. And there we go. So we get a good sense of that, and we can sort of scale in and out and get a sense of where the fracturing is going to occur. Of course, we don't want the fractured one or the exploded one to be in the scene, so we're going to put a null object over here. And that will be the wine glass ready to go. And we're going to call that glass out, fracture out. Okay, zoom out and set the display flag on that, and turn off the templating on exploded view, and there's the wine glass ready to go. In part 4, we're going to set up the RBD simulation so that the bullet smashes the wine glass. With the wine glass selected, go to the rigid body shelf and choose the RBD convex. Selected, go to the rigid body shelf and choose the RBD Convex Proxy tool. This creates a new network called the Auto Top Network, and we'll go into that in a minute. The next thing we need to do is we want to run a simple RBD simulation, so we're also going to put a collision geometry down at the ground. And then we're going to hide that. The ground. And then we're going to hide that from this view. And then we'll dive down into the Auto Dop network. Where we'll see all the parts. We've got the wine glass, the ground plane, and we can start adding properties here. So for instance, we could add some more density, maybe go to 2000. any other properties we might want to modify would be here. We run the RBD sim and we get a sense of what it's looking like. Now it's just the glass pieces falling right now. They're not being...
もうちょっと切っといた方がよかった。
smashed by the glass yet, or by the bullet yet. So the next thing we want to do is look at the convex decomposition. So what this basically is we have bigger pieces that in order to be efficient for the bullet RBD solver, they need to be broken into smaller pieces and then sort of
Convex Decomposition.
glued together. So that gives us these pieces that look all sort of fractured, but eventually that'll be transferred back to the original piece of geometry. But this just gives accurate but high quality RBD results. So we're going to go back up and choose the bullet, and we want to add that into the simulation. And we're going to do that again on the rigid body tab and RBD object. If we go down, now the AutoDop network will again find that this new element's been added into the dynamics network, and it can have its own properties set. So for instance, we can have some initial speed, some velocity that will drive the bullet at the beginning of the simulation, and we can set up some density that will drive the bullet at the beginning of the simulation, and we can set up some density that's a little higher just so it really smashes in there.
ちょっと待って。このワイングラスにセットアップしてんだ。ちょっと待ってよ。ベロシティをつけたらどうなるの？あ、吹っ飛んだ。やべえ、ウケる。ちょっと待って。これじゃ大したことない。20ぐらいしてみるか。こっち、カメラは今こっちを見てるのか。こうか。はいはい。こういう動きするんだ。単純に。なるほど。まあいいや、遊んでる場合じゃねえ。イニシャルスケールじゃない。こっちか。こっちのイニシャルスケールを100。
Okay, next we're going to go back up to the object level and dive back into the wine glass. And what we want to do is we want the base element here, the base to not be affected by the simulation at all. So we're going to make everything in here active except for this bottom piece. And if you look at the primitives, they're labeled as part number 84. So we're going to go in and we're going to add an attribute create node in here. And that's going to allow us to set what's active and what's passive quickly and easily. So we're going to make this attribute passive, and we're going to do everything except 84. And we're going to make them, oh sorry, not passive, we're going to make these active.
84って
And in the process of making these active, everything except 84, we make 84 passive. And then we just add 1 in there. And that will allow us to just leave that base sitting there because it just stays rigid while everything else takes off. Now, we're going in and we're not looking at the convex pieces, we're looking back at the high res one. So all the information from the while everything else takes off. Now we're going in and we're not looking at the convex pieces, we're looking back at the high res one. So all the information from the small little convex pieces are being transferred to this, and we can see
最初から割れてんのが見えてんだが。
information from the small little convex pieces are being transferred to this, and we can see our smashing. So we're getting the accuracy of the simulation from the convex pieces, but we are able to view the final pieces, the renderable pieces here. Now, the bullet's hitting them, but I feel like we could get a more accurate result. And part of the reason for that is the bullet's going so fast that it's sort of
リアルタイムついてるよね。で、
it may not be hitting the surface with enough accuracy. So we're just going to display that by saying, let's look at every 10
なるほど。こんなことできんの？
frames while we play this back, just so we can get a better
ちょっと待って。50にして。これしてね。
of what's going on. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to
めっちゃ細かくなった。なるほど。
just so we can get a better sense of what's going on. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the Autodop network and we're going to add in some substeps. We're going to put, let's say, 5 in there. That should give us a little bit more detail.
弾はどこ行っちゃったんだ。貫通しないのか。丸くなってる。そうなんだ。丸くなってる。形状変わってないのか。しまった。いらんことしたな。
Detail. Now when you press play, you go in and you see the bullet smashing a lot more clearly. So without the substeps, that would see a little bit more detail. Now when you press play, you go in and you see, and we're going to add in, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the Autodop network, and we're going to add in some substeps. We're going to put, let's say, 5 in there. That should give us a little bit more detail. Now when you press play, you go in and you see the bullet smashing a lot more clearly. So without the substeps, that wouldn't have got picked up, or it didn't get picked up earlier. But that gives us a better result, and that's the perfect starting point for our simulation. Now we're going to go work on the fluid. In part 5, we're going to add the fluids to the simulation. And this will be done using the piece of geometry that we modeled way back at the beginning. So that object is here. It's called wine. We don't need to display it. We just need to select it. And then we're going to, on the particle fluid shell,
全部トップネットワークに集約されていくんか。めんどくせえな。
click on the Flip Fluid from Object tool. This takes us right down into the auto dot network. And from here we can start to tinker with some of the parameters. So the very first node that's part of the fluid is the Flip Fluid Object node. And from there we can do things like change the particle separation. This is how many particles are in the simulation, add more detail to it. So you can make that number smaller if you want more particles. We're going to go with 0.05 for now. On the flip solver, this is where you can set up how the solver itself is going to work. You can do things like, for instance, add ID attributes if you want, and then start to play with some of the other parameters, such as maybe turn off reseed particles. And under volume motion, let's do velocity transfer of swirly. This gives good results for this kind of simulation. Clicking on surface tension, because we want the fluid to hold together a little bit better, we're going to increase this, and that will allow you to get a nice shape out of the fluid once we simulate it. So now that we're ready, we're going to press play, which will start the simulation. I have sped this up just so we can see the results quickly. Your computer will decide how fast you're able to simulate. As you can see, we only need to go around maybe 10 frames because we're going to only simulate 10 frames and then retime it later. So
これっぷりがなんか激しいな。セットアップミスってんな。
you only need to sim up about that much. Now if we go down into this network, it's a display flag on the render node, and now we see the actual surface. That we will later render. Now let's go and cache things out. In part 6, we're going to cache and retime the simulations, then output them as USD for rendering purposes. So here we are inside the wine fluid. Now we're going to go back up to the object level, and we're going to get rid of some things. We're going to delete that fluid interior, go back into wine object level, and we're going to get rid of some things. We're going to delete that fluid interior, go back into wine fluid, and we're going to organize this. We don't need all of these nodes. So many of these nodes will be used for purposes that we just we don't need. So we're going to go in and get rid of some of these. We're going to move the ones we need over to the right and the ones we don't over to the left. So we're going to start by selecting all of these ones down at the bottom, and we'll just delete those. By selecting all of these ones down at the bottom, and we'll just delete those, and then we'll get rid of this fluid compress, and that'll give us a simple network to start. And then we'll get rid of this fluid and we'll just delete those, and then we'll get rid of this fluid compress, and that'll give us a simple network.
いつもいらねえの。こんだけでいいの。あ、そっか。ここでサービスに変換してるだけか。フルイドオブジェクト引っ張ってきてるだけか。
Network to start from. The compress cache node allows us to output files to disk, and we're going to do that in a way that will allow us to bring it back and retime it. So first we're going to delete the channels here. And we're going to change that to 10. So you right click on there to get the delete. And we're going to change the name to, within the geo directory, we're going to create another directory called wine, and then we're going to call this the wine fluid $f .bgo.sc, and the $f is the frame number, and the bgo is the file type we're saving, and sc is sort of a compression version of that. And we save that to disk, and we'll get basically 10 files on disk. We can then bring those back in, so we can go and find them in.
What the?
On disk. We can then bring those back in, so we can go and find them in the wine directory in geo. Accept that. And so, rather than simulating the fluid, we can set the display flag instead over on the other side. Now, before we do that, let's go back to instead over on the other side. Now, before we do that, let's go back to just looking at things one frame at a time. We only needed those subframes for simulation purposes. And if we were to play that right now, you would get the, you'd be simulating it because we're looking at the column at the left instead of on the cache. So what we want to do instead is we want to go in and set the file node. And this will allow us to press play, and now it's much faster because we're working with the cat.
エラーになるぞ。そっか、10フレまでしかないからか。
Ash. Now we want to time this a little bit differently for this particular animation. We want to create sort of a bullet time where it comes out really fast and then hovers and then gets sucked back to its original state. So the retime node will let us do that by setting keyframes. So we can go in and say we want to do this by frame. We're going to delete the channel that's on the frame here, which is basically just telling it to match the frame and the timeline, but we're going to do it differently. We're going to set frame 1 at frame 5, and we're going to press the Alt key to press to make a keyframe. Then we're going to move to frame 10, and we're going to change that to 7, and then Alt again to make a keyframe. Now, so that means it'll go really fast up to frame 7. Then we're going to go all the way to frame 40. And the last 3 frames, from 7 to 10, they'll just slowly go from there to there. And that will allow us to get this sort of bullet time look. Then we'll go to frame 45, where we'll set this back to 1. And we will Alt to press make a keyframe. Now once we have that, we can see the results. So it's going to go up and slow down, and basically the retime will fill in the frames that are missing as it gets stretched out and give us a nice fluid result that we can use. Go to the animation.
めっちゃ速くてゆっくりとで戻る。リタイム使ったら簡単に逆再生とかできるんだ。で、タイムライン。
Timeline. If we want to tinker with this, we can go and play with the keyframes, sharpen that a little bit, smooth this out, and so you've got exact control over that using the animation curves. And we'll do something like this. So it.
ちょっと待って。これ全部動くぞ。なんでこれ全部動くの？セグメント、セレクトセグメント、違うな。セレクト、違う。これ何したら片方だけ選べんだ？両方置いちゃうな。まあいいや。片方だけ動かして。何これ。ドル。セレクト。ハンドルインバートハンドルセレクション。 これ片方だけ動かせるの？謎なんだが。わからん。片方だけ動かせんだろうか。謎やな。
Comes down and smooths that out a little bit. So there we've got control. So we press play, and now we go out, and then we go slow, pulls back, pull back, it gets sucked in. So this is allows us to then take the particle fluid surfacer and put that onto our cached out data instead of the original one. And now we can get that all working here. To make this work, we're going to change one thing, which is we're going to change this to La Passion.
Laplacian
flow, the smooth, and used some dilate. Once we have that, we can export this, and we're going to export it as a USD file. That's what we're going to use in Houdini's lighting. Export it as a
Usd Export.
a USD file. That's what we're going to use in Houdini's lighting and rendering context called Solaris. So in this case here, we're going to just create a directory, go to the USD directory, and then create a file called wine surface.usd. And then we're going to use the frame range, and then we're going to correct the spelling mistake.
Surface.
And change that back to wine. Okay. So once we have that, we press Save to Disk, and now we will have a fluid simulation saved on disk in USD format that we will be able to use inside of the Solaris context. Now, just like we're doing that with the fluid, we now need to go and do the same thing for the other objects, the bullet and the glass. So we're going to start by taking the retime node, and we're going to Control-C to copy that, and that will just put that in our clipboard for the moment. And then when we go over to the other networks, we can use exactly the same timing in there as well. So we're going to go into the wine glass, and we're going to start by just caching out what's been animated so far. That will make it easier to do the retime. So we're going to put down what's called a raw geometry, and this will allow us to get a cache of everything so far. And we're going to do frame range. And this we're going to put down what's called prop geometry. And this will allow us to get a cache of everything so far. And we're going to do frame range. We're going to delete with the right mouse button. We're going to delete channels and change this to 10. We're only going to do the first 10 frames, just like we did with the wine. And then we're going to set the output file. So we're going to put a directory in there, this time called wine glass. And we will do, the file will be glass pieces.$f.bgo. And we're ready to go. So we can simulate, cache this out just by pressing Save to Disk. Disk. Because that's already been cached, it's fairly quick. And then we go and pick that up, go into wine, glass pieces, accept. So now this is what we want to now apply the retime to. So we're going to Control V, and that retime should wire itself in. If not, place it down and wire it. And now it has exactly the same animation that the fluid did, because it's the same node with the same keyframes attached to it. Then we're going to tab in, and we're going to just do an attribute delete. There's one attribute that's on this that doesn't, we don't need it in the Solaris context, so we're going to take it out, which is under the primitive attributes. There's a primitive attribute called name, and that would change the way that things get imported into Solaris, so we're going to get rid of that And we're going to do something else now. When the glass is not smashed, we don't want to have it already fractured. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring the original glass over, which is the one that's not smashed. At all, and we're going to put that into a switch node, and we're going to set some keyframes on this. So essentially we can make sure that up till frame 5 the glass is clean and with no cuts, and the cuts don't kick in until frame 5, and then they'll return later in frame 45 based on the animation we have. So we press Alt and set a keyframe at input 0, go to frame 5, change the input to 1.
なるほど。ここでグラスを入れ替えてなくね。ミスった。
And Alt to press another keyframe. Then we're going to go all the way to 45, and we're going to change that to 0, and Alt to get another keyframe. So once we have that, we're good to go. The only thing we have to do, press H to get in. In here is we're going to select these and we're going to make those sharp. So there's no interpolation, just because they're to go. The only thing we have to do, press H to get in here, is we're going to select these and we're going to make those sharp. So there's no interpolation, just because they're basically on-off switches. So there we go. So that starts with a.
あ、これで保管しなくなるんだ。いつも2個キーフレ打ってたわ。ああ、本当だ。なるほど。
The clean, and then it changes to that one, and then it changes back. And that's what we want to output. That's what we're going to use for rendering purposes. So we can now add a USD export, and we're going to place that down. And just like we did before, we're going to create a single output file for this. So we're going to do current frame range. So we're going to do the whole 50 frames. And we're going to change the location of where this gets stored. We're going to go /usd/wineglass.usd. And once we have that, we can press save to disk. And there we go. So now we have that. that ready. So the last thing we want to do is do the same thing with the bullet. So what we'll do here is a little differently. We don't really need to cache this one out per se. We're going to extract that out. Don't really need to cache this one out per se. We're going to extract.
できてなくね。ちょっと待って。セレクテッド。どういうこと？こういうこと？
Back that out to a new file, and we're going to take that new file and we're going to add the retime to it. So we don't need to cache it before it, and we're going to add the retime to it. So we don't need to cache it before we retime it to then go out if it's something small like this. But with the fluid and the wine glass, it was a little safer to do the caching out first. Now after the retime, we're going to delete the last keyframe so it doesn't return. It just the caching out first. Now after the retime wine glass, it was a little safer to do the caching first. Now after the retime, we're going it was a little safer to do the caching out first. Now after the retime we're going to delete the last keyframe so it doesn't return. It just goes right through and then disappears. And then just like we did before, we're going to do a USD export. So
そうか、これで1フラム目の戻らないと。
all of our pieces will be in the USD format, which will support us in rendering in Solaris, and render front range, and then just change the name /USD, and then bullet.usd, and export that out. And now we are ready to go render the shot.
USD ファイルが準備できて。
In part 7, we're going to set up and render the shot. This will involve bringing things over into a new part of Houdini called Solaris. So we're going to start by changing desktops to the Solaris desktop. And this
ついに初ソラリスだ。
points us to a different part of Houdini called /stage. It's empty right now, and we either need to bring things over from the object level or from disk. In this case, we're going to bring in those USD files we stored on disk. We're going to go to the USD directory.
Reference. これで USD を引っ張ってくる。ほう。
Directory and bring in the wine glass. We can use home that view. And if we scrub through the timeline, we see, there we go, we have our wine glass. Now, what we want to do with this is put it into what's known as the USD scene graph in a nice organized way. So the first thing we want to do is rename the node itself, wine glass. Just because the USD file says wine glass doesn't mean the node does. And we're going to put a primitive path of /geo. And that will organize it so in the scene graph, the wine glass gets put inside the geo, sort of under that hierarchy.
Composed scene graph.
Now, once we have that, we can basically just alt-drag this to get another copy. And that will give us more or less the same settings to work from, and we can move from there. So let's do another one, alt-drag to get a third one, and we'll name the second one wine, and the third one bullet. And because in the primitive path it uses $OS, as you change the name of each node, it will change what it looks like in the scene graph. So we're going to set the two objects to the appropriate USD files. Now only one of them is showing up in the USD graph at a time. We're only seeing the bullet right now, so we need to put a merge node down. And we're only seeing the bullet right now, so we need to put a merge node down and merge together the three pieces that we brought into the scene.
あれなんでこれ増えてねえの？ああ、フラグ立ってるやつしか出てないってこと。これでマージンを作ると、 増えねえな。あれ、おかしいな。あ、来た来た来た。
Now you'll see in the scene graph that we have the three parts, the bullet, the wine, and the wine glass. And if we scrub through, we can sort of see all of them interacting here in 3 dimensions. To set the stage a little bit, we want to put a bit of a backdrop in. So we're going to put down a grid right here in the Solaris context. So you can actually build stuff in here instead of just importing stuff in. And we're going to do that by calling this backdrop and then diving into it well, first we're going to make sure the path is the same. We want this also to go into the geo directory. Now you notice the scene graph focuses on whatever node we have selected, so you have to be selecting the merge node to see everything. So now down here at the geometry level, so there's actually a geometry level inside.
ステージってどこにいんだ。ほー。で、引っ張ってこられてる。
The Solaris or LOP node, and in here we are going to set the size to 200 by 200, rows 20 by 20. And to make a backdrop, what we want to do is put a bend node down, wire that in, and this will be used to create a wall by bending up part of the grid. We're going to set the bend value to 75. Isn't oriented the right way, so we want to change that by setting the capture origin to -40 and the direction to -1, 0, and 0. And we'll do the capture length to 20 to sort of soften that up. Now once we have all that, we're going to put a subdivide node down, and that will just smooth the geometry out all the more. So once we have that, we can go back up to the stage level, and at the stage level we're going to be able to see all the parts working together. So we click on that there, we'll bring that up, and if we click on the merge node, we see in the scene graph all of the elements working together. So now if we use the camera, we can dolly, pan, track around, get ourselves to a point where we see the glass and the bullet, and that looks like about where we might want a camera to be. So we can go up to this shelf tool and control click to place a camera. Use So we can go up to this shelf tool and control click to place a camera using the view that's in the viewport. And that gives us sort of what we want. But let's use the view tools. We have to scroll up to get the right icon here. That lock icon there, you want to make sure that's on, which already was, but and then that allows us to, as we make view changes, it updates the position of the camera that we're looking through. So that allows us to use those tools to help position the camera. And now we get basically the view that we're looking for, and that's perfect. Now, once we have that, we want to add some lighting into the shot. So we're going to click on the environment light, and we're going to use an HDRI map. There's a bunch of them come with Houdini in this directory here, and we're going to try. So we're going to click on the environment light.
ブライト。これか。
We're going to use an HDRI map. There's a bunch of them come with Houdini in this directory. Here, and we'll add this garage there, and that will help especially with the reflections on the light on the glass there, and that will help especially with the reflections on the light on the
ここでカルマのプレビュー見れるのね。
glass and the general look and lighting of the scene. We're now using the built-in render that works right in the viewport. We can change different frames and get a feel for what that looks like. This is currently being done using the optics denoiser, which you can turn on using this little sidebar here. You definitely have to have an NVIDIA card for this, and you can install it.
あ、デノイザー。ああ、入れてねえ。入れてねえ。まあいいや。
It off of the render menu up. Anyway,
入れるか。再起動した方がいいか。 かしいな。まあいいや、ちょっと後で調べる。
Anyway, now that we have this, we can now move on and add some materials and render out sequences using Karma.
これでラスト。長かった。パート8もあるとやっぱ長えな。
For part 8, we're going to assign materials and render out the final sequence. To start this process, first going to put down a special LOP node known as a material library.
マテリアルライブラリー。
This is where we can place the materials that we're going to assign to our geometry. Now, if we go to the material palette, the second tab here in the bottom corner, we can open up the /stage/material library 1 and drag in a glass material, a second glass material we're going to use for the wine, and we also can bring in a copper material, which we'll use for the bullet. We can select the second glass and call that wine, and give that a few properties that make it unique from the glass. A different index of refraction that's more appropriate for wine. Bump down the reflectivity so it's not as super shiny as the glass. And then we're going to go down and change the transmission color to be more of a reddish wine color. And we'll set the distance to 0.3. So now that this material is unique, we can start to assign these. And we're not going to do that here. We're going to go back to this level, back to the stage, and we're going to add another node in here called Assign Material. Now we right-click on the output of that one, put down this, set the display flag. So now once we do that, we can begin to assign the different materials. So we go to the network here and we go wine glass and drag it to the thing, the field called So we go to the network here and we go wine glass and drag it to the thing, the field called primitives, and then the material path we click on that, open up materials, and we click on glass. Now once we have that, we can click the
ここでまとめてマテリアルアサインできんのね。
sign here to add a second one, and we're going to drag the wine over to this new one, and with the material path select the wine material. Now it looks a little yellow right now because it's selected, so that adds a yellow highlight. So we're going to add in for
ああ、なるほど、なるほど。もう一個追加ね。パレット。
For the bullet, and once we select the bullet, you can see the line a little better. We put that in.
書いてなかったな。これな気がするけど選ばれねえな。なんでだ。
Here, and then we can click on the material path and set that to copper. The next step is to go and set up a Karma node, which will contain many of the output settings we need to prepare our final sequence. Go into the first input there. And now we're going to change this to the full frame range of 1 to 50. And we're going to change the name of the output to wineglass $f.exr. And that will give us a sequence that we can read back later. It's already pointed to camera 1. We're now going to go in and set up the denoiser. It's already pointed to camera. Camera 1. We're now going to go in and set up the denoiser using the NVIDIA denoiser again, if we have an NVIDIA card. And then from there, we can click Render Disk.
エラーにならないのかなこれ。ああ、だよね。やっぱダメだよね。畜生。ああ、これ前振り聞かれるのか。畜生。止めたい。残念。カルマのワークフローもめちゃくちゃいいかもしれん。ちゃんとやっぱ勉強したいな、カルマ。
Now we'll speed up through this process, and that will allow us to get to the point where it's all ready. And we're going to load from disk, go to the render directory, and load our sequence. And we press play. And there we go. We now have a rendered sequence for this project that we've taken from the beginning, modeling, right through to simulation and rendering.
長かった。2時間半ぐらいやってたな。ここからレンダリングがだいぶ長くなりそうなので、今日はこの辺までにしたいと思います。ちょっと今回初めてカルマ USD をエクスポートしてカルマでレンダリングするみたいなワークフローをやってるんですが、これはだいぶ良さそうですね。フレーム入れ替えても早かったんで、それと使えるような気がしました。ちょっと今後もたまにはなんかカルマのセットアップでレンダリングしていきたいなと思いました。はい。一旦今日はここまでとします。ご視聴ありがとうございました。